Great. So again, thank you all for joining us for Maine Parent Federation's annual conference. We're excited to be doing the conference today and spotlighting inclusion and talking about the challenges, but also the rewards of including our children and students in the community and in schools. I want to make this as much a conversation as possible with all of our attendees. I have spotlighted our panelists and we'll continue to do that throughout the day with each session. And please feel free to use the chat box, use the raise hand feature, and unmute yourself, whatever you're comfortable with, to ask questions throughout the presentations. I might pause, or it might take a couple minutes to get a question answered, so as I don't necessarily interrupt individuals who are sharing at that point in time. So if you do put a question in the chat box, don't panic if it's not getting answered right away. We will do our best to get all your questions answered today. We're starting this morning with a panelist session, and I am really excited to have Renee Thorington, Carrie Potter, and Connor Archer joining us this morning. Renee, Carrie, and myself are all parents of children with disabilities who have experienced inclusion in schools and in the community. And so we're each going to talk about our experiences as a parent. And Connor is a young adult with autism who has self-advocated for himself to be included and in the community, and owns his own business as well. So Connor is joining us to speak about his personal experience. So the format this morning is going to be our panelists will each share for about 10 minutes about their experiences, and then we will give some time for questions. But if you have a question come up as our panelists are sharing, as I mentioned, please feel free to raise your hand or use the chat box, and we will get those questions answered. So I will start today. Again, my name is Carrie Woodcock. I'm the Executive Director for Maine Parent Federation. Jesse is my guest in the background. He's a cockatoo for all those that are interested. I have two children with special healthcare needs. I have a soon-to-be 15-year-old in a couple weeks with Down syndrome, and she is an 8th grader at Saco Middle School. And I also have a 17-year-old who has ADHD and dyslexia. Samantha is my 15-year-old with Down syndrome, and she has an IEP and has had an IEP since entering into early intervention and CDS services. And Noah, who is my 17-year-old with ADHD and dyslexia, had an IEP for 3rd grade through 7th grade, and then transitioned to a 504. He's currently a junior at Thornton Academy and still has a 504 plan. Noah has been fully included his entire life with just some pull-out help for his reading instruction. So the real inclusion here comes for my daughter Samantha with Down syndrome and significant delays. She has been included with the exception of part of her 1st grade year for the entirety of her school career. And I will say it has gotten more challenging in the middle school years as expected as that academic gap gets bigger, but we have used many different people within our grasp to help us with the process of including. So I will say that Sammy is very, very high functioning. And I think because of her inclusion within her school-based programming and community programs, that has really assisted in her ability to self-advocate for herself and to have peers and friends within her school-based community that she does things with after school. Sammy actually is friends with Renee's daughter, Rose, and they met during horseback riding lessons that they took together, and oftentimes have lots of play dates together. So it's the ability to be included both in school, but also within community programs that has really assisted Sammy in her ability to have friends, which I know working for Maine Parent Federation is one of the biggest concerns for our families when we talk to them about their children, and having peers and having recreational time is really important. Having the same social and emotional experience as their peers are having are really important, and being included is the first steps to being able to make those type of experience happen for your children. The school has pushed back on occasion with Sammy's inclusion, and as a parent, I have made it quite clear that Sammy's least restrictive environment is the mainstream. And because she's been mainstreamed for such a long period of time, we have lots of data to show the school why that's her least restrictive environment. So as most of us know, within the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which are your legal rights for special education, the first and foremost placement for your child should be in their least restrictive environment with typically developing peers. Once you have data to show that that environment is working the best for your child, which means that they have to be included to make that happen, then it's really hard for the school to place your child outside that least restrictive environment. So Sammy has had that data and continues to have that data, and I make sure that I collect that data on a regular basis from our school district to ensure that as it gets more difficult, and it has gotten more difficult in the middle school years, and she'll be transitioning to high school next year, and I anticipate it will continue to be difficult to fully include her during those years. I have the data to show that her best placement is with her typically developing peers. Does that mean that Sammy is in a mainstream classroom 100% of the time? Nope, because she gets pull-out services for things like speech therapy, occupational therapy, and physical therapy during her school day. And so there are times where she is pulled out during her school day, but we try to minimize that so that her pull-out time doesn't exceed more than an hour during her school day. And sometimes those therapists push into the mainstream classroom as well. So, for example, speech therapy might push in during an academic period to assist Sammy in being able to socialize with her peers and have reciprocal conversations with her peers. There are times during OT where if she's in like the STEM classroom where it takes a lot of fine motor skills in the STEM classroom, the OT can push in and assist Sammy with some of those fine motor skills. So there's always opportunity for those therapists to push into the mainstream classrooms. And a lot of times it takes parent advocacy to have those pullouts, which are, the schools most likely will want to be pulling out for, to advocate for those to be pushed into the mainstream classroom. And I've done that throughout Sammy's career. And there are times where pullout is definitely better for her for reasons of distraction. And so I have to be aware of those times and compromise and have conversations with the schools to really figure out what the least restrictive environment is for Sammy. In addition to our school-based inclusion, we do a lot of different activities with Sammy within the community. And I mentioned horseback riding, which is how she met Rose. We also participate in Maine Adaptive, alpine skiing. And Maine Adaptive has not just skiing, it just happens to be the activity we're participating in, but they have activities year round, which is a great way for your child to have experience with recreational activities, but also create relationships with others within the community. The other thing that we started this year was swim lessons. So she's been doing swim lessons at the Reiki Pool in Portland, which we're 3 weeks in, but it has been a great experience for her as well. And being able to experience and build confidence in her swimming abilities. And my thought process with that is that so over the summer she has more confidence when she's interacting with her peers in pool-based activities or lake-based, or we live in Maine, so going to the beach, having confidence around the water really helps her to be able to participate with her peers. So taking advantage of opportunities such as that has really helped Sammy to fit in with her peers, be able to have friends, for people to understand what they can do to support Sammy. And also inclusion, there's lots of studies about inclusion doesn't just help the individual with a disability. It helps their peers as well. There was a study that was presented at a Down syndrome conference in Massachusetts I went to a few years back. And peers that are around individuals with disabilities, it was like a 17% greater growth rate for those peers who had the ability to be mentors than others who didn't have that ability. So the theory of when a child with a disability is included into a classroom, it brings the level of study down for others is completely untrue. If we're doing universal design correctly, it actually is the opposite. It brings those peers up because it's exposing them to the ability to be a mentor, to the ability to be a leader, to the ability to communicate in ways they may never have had to communicate before. All things which they're going to use when they get out to the real world. So that argument that it brings the level of the class down is just simply defunct. It's not true. It brings greater value to the classroom when you're including children of all abilities. So noticing the time, I am going to stop sharing my story of Sammy, and I am going to pass it on. I would like our parents to go, and then Connor, I think it'd be powerful for you to follow up at the end as a self-advocate if you're okay with that. So Carrie or Renee, do you guys have a preference?
No. No, I'll go if you
Okay,
want.
go ahead, Renee, and I'll mute myself.
I am Renee Thorington. My daughter's 12 years old. God, I had to think about that for a minute. 12 years old. Her name is Rose. She is one of two children that I have. My son is 20 and he's in college. He does not have a disability and never had any learning disabilities. In fact, he was kind of on the other end where he was more in kind of the advanced. So to be able to, even though you're not supposed to compare your children, to be able to compare Rose as an infant to him as an infant in the way that they were developing, it was very clear to me early on that there was something different about her. And it wasn't just that she was bigger and lazier, is what I used to call her. She was just big and lazy, and that's why she can't move. But it was that, there were definitely things about the way she conducted herself physically and emotionally that were very, very different. She was very noise sensitive as an infant. She, when we would have family parties, which I have a big, loud family, so when we would go to a birthday party, Rose would yell and scream. And it was clear to me that there was something different about her. She, at about 20 months old, was diagnosed with global developmental delay. They didn't really know what to call it at that point. So we immediately kind of hooked up with CDS. She, when entering preschool at the age of 3, had an IEP, and she had services at that point during preschool, OT services. I was getting her outside PT at the time because to me, as a parent, that seemed to make sense because she was really having difficulty with movement. So I was getting her outside PT, and she was getting speech and OT in preschool. Transition to kindergarten. She was held back in her kindergarten year. My goals for her in kindergarten, knowing that she was struggling, were that she could write her name, were that she would make a friend, and that she would get used to being in school. And she had attended a preschool full time, so she was really good at following rules, standing in line, and doing all the stuff that you kind of learn in kindergarten. She was really good at that. Learning, on the other hand, was a bit more of a challenge. And that was very clear. That became very clear in her kindergarten year. So they asked me if I would like to hold her back. I said yes. She was held back in kindergarten, repeated the year, but really didn't make any academic progress. At the end of her kindergarten year, her classroom teacher told me that she thought that Rose should be put into a life skills kind of resource program. And I thought, well, aren't you going to teach her to read and write? Like, but what about that? And I was just so upset by it, just because in my gut, and I would say always trust your gut. In my gut, I knew she had more potential than what they were saying she had. And I actually hired a parent advocate at that point that was with us through first grade and most of second grade. And I really learned a lot from that person. Because, back in the beginning, I was a little bit nervous about being too loud and advocating too much for her, for fear that they would somehow retaliate and treat her worse at school. I don't know why I felt that way, but I think that's probably a common feeling among parents. You don't want to you don't want to stand up to them because you're kind of afraid of all the unknowns. Like, well, what are they going to do? Well, how is she going to be treated? Well, how are things going to be different for her during the day? Um, but it turned out that that was the opposite. So once you kind of open up, I found, and speak loudly for your child and start to know and understand what her rights are as a student, or his rights are as a student, they back off and listen, and it's easier and becomes easier to make requests and to request testing and request data. And Carrie, you touched on the point of data, and I would say, had I not requested data from the school system on why they were making or wanted to make that decision to put her in that type of program, uh, we would be nowhere at this point. I found out by asking them for the data, which your school should always be able to provide, particularly if your child has an IEP, that by asking for the data, everybody has data, but the way they collect it and how valid it is and the way it's validated and how qualitative it is there are no rules around that. They can say they're collecting data, but it might not really be telling us anything. So I would push for the kind of data that will allow them to back up their decisions and allow you to make a confident decision about the way your child is treated in school and in the curriculum that they're recommending for them. So I've kind of used that. My advocate that I had hired was really big on the data, pushed so hard for it that he made people cry. Like, they were upset, visibly upset during the meetings. And because they didn't have it. They really didn't have what we were looking for. So therefore, we had the power to be able to say, no, this is what we want, and this is what we're going to try, and this is what I want you to try. I mean, oftentimes in a young student's life, it's trial and error, right? You have to try different things in order to figure out what's working for a child and what isn't. She's in 5th grade now, and all the years starting in 1st and 2nd grade up to 5th grade have been really, really good in terms of our advocacy for her, except for 3rd grade. She transitioned to a new school, and I would say that she did not have a strong case manager at school that year, and that person was kind of on her way out and really didn't do very well in using the data that we had given her from 2nd grade and moving it into 3rd grade. So there was a little bit of a continuity problem there for 3rd grade. Luckily, she caught up in 4th grade, though it was during the pandemic. She happened to be a very good online learner because she tends to be distracted in the classroom. So she had a one-on-one with her ed tech was providing her curriculum for her all day, every day on the screen. And she was sitting there and doing it with several breaks throughout the day. So, and that was something I had to advocate for after having the few months the previous year of trying to be her teacher and working full time during the pandemic. I would say that was not working for us, for anybody. She needed a representative from the school. She qualified for a one-on-one. That one-on-one was with her on the screen, providing her curriculum every day. And that's what I requested, and that's what she got. This year, she's, getting ready to transition into middle school, and we're terrified. I continue to advocate for her. Her triennial is going on right now, and her classification is changing. She was diagnosed with autism when she was 9, and that was a late diagnosis. But, it took us going to several different doctors, several different several different people to understand exactly what was going on as she got older and changed. Um, she continues to make academic progress, however slow. She does have significant delays. Um, but in order to prepare for her going into a new school next year and a school in which she changes classes, am going to be requesting a tour of the school and a tour of the special ed department. I want to meet all the people and I want to see all the spaces and I want to talk about her specifically. Am I running over, Carrie? I'm yammering on and on.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
We'll transition to Carrie in a second, but in order
Okay.
to make that transition, I'd like to, there's a question in the chat box about what types of data did you collect that you found particularly helpful? Was it behavioral or academic? And the answer to that question is yes. But to be honest, you
Yeah.
collect all the data that you could possibly collect.
Yes.
And it's not just from the school. So if you're working with outside there, like I have an entire pantry downstairs, an entire shelf dedicated to Sammy's data.
Mm,
And so anything that the school sends home or that that the school is collecting, I mean,
yeah.
I have every single communication sheet that has ever gone back and forth between me and the school since we put communication sheets in place for Sammy.
Mhm.
So anything that the school is collecting, but also, when she's working with outside therapists, even, we get progress reports for her horseback riding lessons.
Yeah.
I get progress reports for swim lessons. So I keep all of that, all of her doctor's appointments, the summary of the visit. I keep that as well, so that for
Yeah.
she does take medication for behavior, and so it's really important for me to be able to have what we talked and documented, at her med management appointment, so that I can share that with the school. So it's every interaction that I'm having with people who are providing care to Sammy for her in-home and community-based support. She has a BHP. I keep all the communication with them as well and all the goals. And I share that with whoever I need to share it with in order for them to understand Sammy's present level of performance and what kind of accommodations and modifications she's going to need to
I
be able
agree
to
with
be,
that.
a participant in the mainstream
Yeah.
environment, whether it be school or community. The
Yeah.
more information you can
All the
provide.
information gets shared with everybody. Like it is a full community that is helping. So as much as every single person knows, the BHP should have a copy of the IEP. The school should have a copy of her plan that she, and her goals, a list of her goals from the BHP. All of that information is relevant. As far as the data that I asked for from the school, I asked them for charts and numbers. I wanted to know when she's doing her math, and they got really granular with it because we had that advocate who was who was laying down the law. um, it was a little too granular, but it was necessary for me to understand that what, several days a week she's hitting the mark with the math problems that they're giving her. A couple of days a week she's not. Like, what's going on during those couple of days? Is there something different that's happening during the day that is distracting her? Is the environment different? Is it at a different time of day? Like, all of those things were looked at, and so that we can then have the information that we need to decide what environment she learns best in. She is currently in the mainstream classroom 67% of the day. I know that because I asked for the data.
Yeah. And it's listed on the IEP as well.
It is listed. Yeah, they
Yeah.
have to kind of say that, but that's, you can ask for that information at any point. If
Yeah,
they
so
change
school
something
systems,
up.
if
Yeah,
your child has an IEP and they have goals, school
yeah,
systems should be collecting data in order to show if they're meeting their goals. And
exactly.
you can guide them on, like, for example, we have behaviors at school. And so we worked together with Sammy's behavior plan to identify the behaviors that were really significant and how we were going to track that data. And I
Mm,
actually get that data on a daily basis. So like refusals to do work, trying to elope from the classroom, any type of aggression that she might be using. On a daily basis, I can see how her day was.
yeah.
And we're actually transitioning now from, the school filling out that communication sheet to Sammy assisting in filling out that transition communication sheet, because that really assists her with self-advocacy goals and understanding how her day went and how she can improve upon certain things.
Mhm,
And some of those things are just verbalizing that I'm tired and I need to move on.
mhm.
But the more you incorporate your child into the IEP meetings and having them participate at a very early age, the more you're increasing their self-advocacy skills. And if you're able to do that, the easier it's going to be for them to be included.
Yeah, we
So I
haven't done
think
that yet, but I think we're getting ready to do that.
on the pathway to that, yeah. So now I'm going to introduce Carrie Potter and let her share her story about her daughter.
Hello, my name is Carrie Potter, and I have a daughter, Zoe, and she is actually getting ready to turn 21 in April. So she is out of high school. But when she was born a micro preemie. So she weighed 1 pound and 5 ounces at birth and had an extended NICU stay and had multiple surgeries. And as a result of the prematurity, she's had multiple diagnoses. So she has hydrocephalus. She has, I would say, mild cerebral palsy. Um, she's had some vision surgeries due to the prematurity. And then she's had, I'm trying to think, um, she was diagnosed with nonverbal learning disorder as she got a little older, probably in elementary school. And then she also has epilepsy. And so she had quite a few medical conditions. She transitioned from NICU and came home at 6 months old, and then went through early intervention and received multiple supports. And then, as she transitioned from early intervention to school services, is about the time that I actually, when she was 4, I got hired at our parent center, or one of the 2 parent centers in Illinois. So I've been with the parent center since she was 4, and that's been a big help. But really, from the time that she was born, I would say I knew she had a lot of things stacked against her as far as diagnosis, but I never really wanted those to define who she was or limit her. So I wanted her to have every opportunity in life. And so, really, just from the time she was born, I kind of had a mindset that I want her to have the same options as far as education and in life as her peers. I would say inclusion really came fairly easy in her early years of school. And then as she got a little older, as academics were a little less concrete and a little more abstract, that it became apparent there was more of a difficulty there for her to grasp more abstract content or material. So we really had to work towards just kind of, we always made clear our intent that we wanted her included with her peers, but we had to work a little harder toward that. I remember math became really difficult around the time of 3rd grade, and um, there had been a placement change made without my knowledge. And then when a progress report came home, something didn't look right on it to me. And I started asking more questions and realized that a decision had been made without an IEP meeting or without any discussion to us or notification that she had been put in a special education setting for math. So then we called a meeting and, really had a discussion about, hey, these decisions can't be made without us. We as parents are, equal members of that IEP process. And I would say from like 3rd grade on, we really had to advocate more for her to remain included. And I really try to look at it as, I've always heard that if you look at your child and their needs, there's somebody else in the world with those same types of needs who's included fully in life and in their education. So I always looked at and talked to the team about, if there's a concern about not being able to meet her needs or a concern that she can't do something, let's meet and talk about what options we have. Or if we don't know as a team how to meet that specific need, let's look at who we can bring in to help us. I know as she hit like junior high, again, there were more conversations about, she's struggling with math. Let's put her in a special education classroom. I did agree to that at one point because I wasn't sure what else to do. About the time she was entering high school, I did talk to Julie Costin, who is I guess her title would be inclusion specialist. And she connected me with Kate McLeod, who actually came in and did an observation of Zoe and met with us as an IEP team and talked about, what she observed and how, us as a team could meaningfully include her and meet her needs in that setting. So that was very helpful. And then having that report, really helped me. If there were concerns that came up, I could always say, let's reach out to Kate if we have questions, or if we can't figure things out, or I don't think moving her to a more restricted setting would be appropriate. And one thing I think I really relied on throughout her school career was asking for a right to prior written notice or denial in writing. So just if the school wasn't in agreement with what I was asking for, then I could, put that in writing and ask for clarification in writing. And a lot of times that would turn the situation around and kind of open communication again.
Just
I
to
will
be
say,
clear, Carrie, I just want to, so Carrie does not live in Maine. And I know this is confusing because there's two Carries. So the Maine state laws may differ from her state laws as far as parent consent is
true.
concerned with IEPs. So I just want to just a point of clarification here. If you disagree with a service that's being provided on the IEP, but the IEP team consensus is that that service is going to be put in place, that service is put in place in the state of Maine, and it falls on the parent to file a complaint, mediation, or due process in order to get that decision, to attempt to get that decision changed. And so that process would need to happen in Maine. That being said, usually when you're working, or most times when you're working with a school district, there is the opportunity to find compromise, and you can call Maine Parent Federation, and we do have a program in which we can attend meetings and assist you. It's called the Family Support Navigator Program. It's not legal advocacy, but a lot of times when we show up, the door for compromise opens a lot wider than was previously happening when it was just the parent trying to advocate. Not that that's the way it should be, but sometimes that's what happens. And we try to do it in a way in which it's assertive and we're educating the parents on their rights and we know what they're asking for. But we do a lot of work pre-IEP meeting with the parents on identifying what they're asking for, what the right is, how to ask for it, and how to present the data to ask for it, to try to avoid having to go down that route. But in Maine, the law states that all IEP decisions are made through an IEP team consensus. And so whatever the team comes to agreement on, even if the parent is in disagreement, if you're outnumbered, that action goes into place and it falls on the parent to use their rights to make that change. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. We weren't confusing anybody with state laws or rights, but sorry to interrupt you, Carrie. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. And I appreciate that clarification. And, IEP team decisions here are made as a team. It's just sometimes you can use prior written notice to kind of open that communication and express your concerns if you're not in agreement with something that has been proposed. So, you still have to meet and kind of discuss those concerns. So, I will say, when Zoe was getting ready to transition into high school, we made sure to have the discussion of a lot of parents, and I don't know if this is different in Maine, but diploma versus certificate of attendance or participation or whatever was a conversation that we had, and did agree that she would work towards achieving a diploma as she, exited high school. And I'd say we really included Zoe in the IEP process. She's been to trainings on the person-centered planning, and has used the MAPS process to kind of help her have more of a voice in her IEP meetings when she was in school and kind of lead those. So that was really beneficial and helpful to her. And we still use some of those tools now that she's an adult to help her look at, her goals and things like that. She had a lot of volunteering experience in high school with the local library near where we live. And so she's still involved with the library and goes there weekly to volunteer. She's a very social person. So she loved participating in things like homecoming and prom and school activities to kind of be involved with her friends. And I would say really technology, there's so much technology now, we really used a lot to help her maintain being included and meet her needs. So she used Bookshare. If you're not familiar with that, it's basically an app that was downloaded to her iPad, and then she could access all of her textbooks and things like that. And she could listen to them auditorily rather than having to read them. And so that was really helpful for her. Um, when she had to pick classes in high school, she was involved in that process. She found a lot about what she didn't like. She took photography, did not love photography. She took Spanish in 8th grade, a semester of it. She did not like it and said, I don't want to take more foreign language in high school. But then she found things that she loved, like art. Um, and that kind of inspired her to take more art classes outside of school. And I will say she loved public speaking and got an award for public speaking in high school. And she's had many opportunities to speak to groups through my work. Kate McLeod has invited her to speak to some of her college classes through the years. And so, she's really found a passion for that and does that as opportunities arise. But sometimes I do think it was not everything was just she wasn't just automatically included in things. Sometimes we had to help people think outside of the box, and see that she can be included, and there was value in her being included and being with her peers, and that she may learn differently, but that's okay. We all do. No two people learn the same, and that um, you know we don't. I guess what I always said to staff was that we need to make the least dangerous assumption and always presume competence. And I still see her pulling out information now that she's 21 that she may have learned in junior high or high school, but she'll tell me something and I'm like, where did you learn that? Well, I learned that in business class freshman year in high school. Are you paying your taxes? You don't want the IRS to come after you, things like that. And she's very knowledgeable about those things, and learning to vote was very important for her. And so when she turned 18, she was able to vote in the presidential election. That was something very important to her. She did her own research, made her own decisions. I took her, and she exercised that right. So I think she has learned so much from her peers and from her teachers and people in her community, and a lot of that is because she's been so included.
Thank you, Carrie. I just want to point out, Carrie made a point about diplomas and certificates of attendance. And so in our state, what was previously voted into law, the proficiency-based diplomas, has been repealed and is no longer being mandated by the state. It is a district by district decision. And so having that conversation and having that worked into a transition plan about what your student will be working towards, whether it be a certificate of attendance or regular education diploma, is something that is different for each and every district in our state. So when you do first enter high school and are starting to create that transition plan, that is a subject that you should be talking about. So I just want to make sure that you understand how the state of Maine works. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Connor.
Awesome. Thank you, Carrie. And I'm going to share my screen because I know many are visual people like I am. Can everyone see my screen? Perfect. All right. I'm just going to keep it like this. That way it doesn't mess up our screen. So good morning, everyone. I can recognize some faces on here, so that's always exciting. My name is Connor Archer. I live in Bangor, graduate of Old Town High School in 2016. And I'm an individual, young adult that lives with autism. I was diagnosed at 3 years old. The story behind the diagnosis was my mom was was at the hospital or leaving for the hospital, having my younger brother, Colby. And I had never been away from my mom for more than probably 8 hours at a time until then. So when she left, my grandmother took care of me. So I didn't know where my mom was, but I couldn't communicate that. So I started flipping chairs over in the dining room table because I couldn't express how. I couldn't say, where's mom? I need mom. Why isn't she here? So my grandmother noticed this and took me to the hospital to see mom after Colby was born. And I would once I got there, I remember my mom told me this back along. I collapsed on the ground due to exhaustion, and my mom my my mom said, we've got to do something. So my mom had me tested. Mom and dad had me tested for run through several tests with psychologists, speech therapists, doctors, and the diagnosis of autism, low functioning autism at the time, came about. Back in the late 90s, it was the diagnosis was not as quick. And and even early 2000s, the access and understanding to the diagnosis was still evolving. So the doctors, I remember, and I keep saying this to those I talk to, the doctors told my mom, your son most likely will never talk. And that, obviously today, that's very different. My mom took that answer and basically, threw it out the window and said, we are going to do everything we can to help our son learn how to talk and be included in the mainstream setting. My mom did not know a lot about the diagnosis initially. Like many parents on here, she had to learn, ask questions, really advocate for my needs. She found a tremendous preschool program at the time called the Greenhouse Nursery School in Milford. And to this day, which I'll mention a little bit later, they have a huge impact on me. And it gave me the foundation of speech, physical, occupational therapy at a young age to move into public school successfully. But I was also included with peers that were typically developing, or that may have not had as significant challenges like I had. My mom went back to school to get her master's in special education, and then later on her CAS in literacy in special education. Also just got our national board. I keep telling her, Mom, you probably can stop going for degrees now, and she's like, I'll do my PhD at some point. So she has used her learnings to support me, but now she gives back to other kids in her classes. She's a middle school science, math, English teacher, and she does everything she can to include those students in the classroom at all times. She understands the importance of it. She understood how important it was for me. And to this day she still does that for all of her students. In elementary school, I had a great group of friends who took me under their wing when I needed them most. We're just talking the other day, and they really stood up for me when I needed them most. I may have had frustrating moments, may have not always been easy, but they stood by my side. They would include me in activities. They would help me if I needed it. And they didn't know that I had a diagnosis, and not many did, which I'll go into in a few minutes, until later. So they just accepted me at the time for who for who I was, and many did, all the way through elementary school as I continued to make gains in several areas. Test taking, for example, was very challenging for me. Completing schoolwork, I had to pre-teach myself, or my mom had to pre-teach me in order the content over the summer. So basically, my mom would ask for the content in June, and she would teach everything for the fall and into the winter over the summer. So that way I would be familiar with the content going into the classroom that school year. I may have not retained all of it, but at least I had some familiarity to it and was not overwhelmed by the content. I also live with an anxiety disorder. So that, along with autism, definitely presents its own challenges. And that continued to present challenges going into middle school. And the middle school is a scary time for any child, a lot of change, a lot of growth. But I had some great opportunities in middle school. One, especially my 8th grade year, my peers elected me as student council president that year. I didn't expect that, but they saw my leadership qualities and attention to detail at a young age, and that gave me the opportunity to really have an impact, with our middle school, but students as well. Did a lot of great things that year, but the best part was that I encouraged most of the peers that were there for me, to run for an office, and they did, and they were they were our vice president, secretary, treasurer, and they were all supporting me in doing this successfully, and that led to some great things, going into high school. And I shared my story my sophomore year through a health project that we were assigned in class. And I remember that coming home and telling my mom and saying, Mom, I want to do the project on autism. And this was a health project. We had to research about autism, the diagnosis, and I was familiar with it. So it really wasn't about the research at that point. So my mom said, oh, we're just going to do a research project about autism. And I said, no, I want to tell my story publicly and inspire change and inspire others to advocate for themselves. So I remember that evening before, I was a nervous wreck because I did not know what the reaction would be. I really didn't know the reaction afterwards either for a little bit. I had just looking at my peers, saying, I'm standing here. I said this, I am standing here before you today as an individual living with autism. And that was a powerful statement in itself and still resembles, with me to this day. And really has, inspired all of my work ever since. I mean, that day alone changed my life, meaning opportunity wise, but also changed me in many ways. It was a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. And that allowed me to go and do what I always wanted to do. And it was give back to those that helped me or supported me when I needed them most. So what I did back in 2014, this was about 8 years ago, I started a nonprofit, which is a group at the time called the Courageous Steps Project. My peers helped me with our first walk run. My family was a huge support in getting this started. We did a walk run, a back to school drive, one word initiative with schools, and a few other, and some speaking. And part really it was to give back to programs and allow and to raise awareness of developmental challenges and other various challenges, which we clarified at a later stage to be more inclusive. Once I graduated high school and this was after I went to Washington, D.C. and received a national award for youth volunteerism by the nation's largest program at the time, the Prudential Spirit of Community Awards. Basically, it's an applicant pool out of 29,000 high school students in the country, and I was one of 5 high school students chosen for this award nationwide. I really had I knew I had a bigger purpose to fulfill, and I started doing that in college. We created the nonprofit umbrella officially. We expanded our programming around Eastern Maine. At the time, we were still a very small organization, so it was a lot of getting volunteers involved, getting families involved. A lot of our board members are parents of children with a diagnosis or with a challenge. And I sit here speaking to you today 2 years after probably the craziest pandemic, or time we've ever seen. Just so thankful for, just was so thankful for continuing to do this. It truly is all that I know. I ran cross country and track in school, was our top runner in school, but I gave a lot of that, or I pushed a lot of that aside after I graduated, because I knew I needed to do this for students, to ensure that they would feel, to promote more inclusion, to support families who needed it most, needed my advocacy skills, or my advocacy, we were promoting advocacy, but also to instill change. And that's a big push with me right now. I have a pleasure of sitting on a few state committees currently, to work on some transition work for high school students transitioning into their next stage of their lives. And this is work I've always wanted to do. And I graduated college with my master's in business last May. And this is truly the first time that I'm able to really focus on this great work. I'm always a giver. I've always been. I'll continue to be. There are so many needs that are going to be more apparent, or become more apparent, especially after the past few years. And I know it's partially my job and duty to help help instill the importance of what we need to do as a state, but also as a country, because our youth is our future. They are our future, and promoting the importance of inclusion, and that we are all unique. We all have different skill sets, but that's okay. We all have something powerful to contribute, and it's important for us as adults, and as young individuals as well, to keep an open mind, be flexible, adjust as needed, and adjusting is hard. Advocate when you need it, when someone needs it. Don't take no for an answer if you don't have to. Always keep fighting for the simple report, for the simple accommodation. That's worked for me. And I still to this day refuse to take no for an answer. This work means so much to me. And I keep saying this, and I always will. I will continue to fight for young children and young adults in order, so they can have the same opportunities that I did.
Thank you, Connor. I knew you would do a great job of pulling it all together for us. You spoke about your parents and your mom, and I'm unlike your mom, I'm not getting my PhD, but I appreciate her absolute thrive for education and wanting to find ways not only to help you, but to continue as a teacher to help other students in the classroom. I also love how you spoke about high expectations. And I think that's really important, because as parents, we hold high expectations for all of our children. And my expectations for my daughter is the same as for my son. The way we get there looks differently, but my expectations for her are the same. And oftentimes at IEP meetings, I find myself saying over and over and over again, we need to keep the expectations high for Sammy, because she's proved us wrong so many times. And all of these kids prove us wrong so many times. And if the bar is low, we may never know her potential, and we've lost everything. If the bar is raised high and she's, struggling, then we can adjust the bar to meet her needs. But if it's not at that high level, we never know what she's going to be able to do. And I think, from day one of diagnosis, we've been told what our children can't do. One of your first shares, Connor, was that when you got your diagnosis, you were diagnosed as a low functioning individual with autism. Well, if this is low functioning, I've got a word or two, because Connor is clearly very high functioning, and has done a phenomenal job, not only advocating for himself, but taking his work to help all of our children with special needs. And so I really appreciate you bringing it together for us, because you spoke not only for what you were able to do, but how your parents helped you. And I think that really helps bring home the point that myself and Carrie and Renee are making. You appreciate that now at a level that you probably didn't when you were younger, or weren't aware of when you were younger.
I didn't, and I'll just add to that. It was a team effort. This was a complete team effort. Professionals, family, friends. I will always say thank you to those individuals, and I just did last night for something related to the organization. None of what I've been able to do would be without their support, and I will always be grateful for that. One thing too, you mentioned, Carrie, about IEP meetings. I sat in my meetings, at 8 years old, and
Yeah.
my mom, I didn't understand IEP meetings in how they ran, or my accommodations fully, but she sat me in there, and she would make sure that I would learn about the accommodations, learn how it's set up, and eventually, when I got into late middle school and high school, I ran my own IEP meetings.
Yep.
I would sit in there. And basically, if I wasn't receiving something, they could tell my face, and it changed, from there. There was immediate change, because it was either myself or my mom who would basically not allow, a problem to get any further down the road. And I think that inspired a lot of teachers in the mainstream classroom setting to rethink how they taught me, but also how they taught other students as well. And I can say proudly that, I've inspired many teachers to rethink how they teach as well. And I think that's been powerful for me. As the analogy comes, our students can be sometimes our best teachers. And I'm a big believer in that too.
Yeah, I would give that a very loud second. Sammy's best teachers are her peers, and sometimes getting teachers to buy into that concept can be very, very difficult. But it's very true. We learn best from our peers. Even as adults, we learn best from our peers. And so that model is why inclusion needs to be happening in our classroom. So I want to thank all of you, Connor, Renee, and Carrie, for taking your time out today to share your stories and your message. It's very, very powerful. There's lots of thank yous in the chat box. I'm not going to read them all, but everybody's very inspired by your stories. To bring a couple things together and what was highlighted. Carrie Potter mentioned, and I apologize for the bird noises in the background. He's competing with me. He's a teenager too. Carrie Potter mentioned Kate McLeod. I did share in the chat box. Kate will be presenting at 1:30. Kate also worked with myself and my daughter Sammy on her inclusion for academics with our school system. Main site is Maine's Assistive Technology organization in the state of Maine, and actually contracts with the Maine Department of Education. So they're going to be presenting today from 4 to 5. Assistive technology will help your child not only while they're in school, but when they graduate and then they're trying to get access to different, whether it be post-secondary education, adult education, or volunteering, or working, or community-based programs. Assistive technology will play a huge role in your children's lives. And then Courtney Angelsante, she's a board certified behavior analyst. She works for the University of Maine, Orono. I've actually brought Courtney on board for my own daughter's IEP recently because of behaviors. And so she's going to do a session this afternoon after Kate about when behavior can become a barrier to inclusion. So I think we touched upon all those topics, which was great because it really sort of gave you an introduction to our conference today. And so I wanted to let you know that we'll be talking more about those topics. And then of course, in about a half hour at 12 o'clock, we have Dan and Samuel Habib as our keynote speakers. Dan Habib has done many different films. His first one was Including Samuel, which talked about his son Samuel and how he fought to have him included in his school. Intelligent Lives is another film that he has done, which highlights the lives of 3 individuals with intellectual disabilities and their ability to access inclusion at school, but also post-secondary opportunities for themselves. And so Samuel has graduated from high school and is now working with his dad as well as attending community college and presents with him. So I thought it would be a very powerful duo as our keynote speaker, and they're going to be presenting from 12 to 1:30 today. So we look forward to spending the rest of the day with you. Thank you again to Renee, Connor, and Carrie. And again, we did record the session, so it will be up on our website, hopefully in the coming days. So thank you all for joining us this morning, and I hope to see you the remainder of the day.